You're listening to Science and Saucery, a show dedicated to adding life to your years. And now your hosts, registered dietitian Juliana Hever and scientist Ray Cronice.
Welcome.
Hello, hello.
How are you doing today, Juliana?
I am great, thanks, Raymond James. How are you?
Doing great. We've had some really fun interviews lately, and today is going to be no exception.
That is true.
So Liz Parrish is a good friend of mine, and she's the CEO of BioViva. And they are a company that's dedicated to improving longevity through the futures of genetic engineering, which is really it's kind of both a controversial and also an exciting topic. So I think we're going to have a lot of fun today talking with Liz. She's a really amazing communicator and knows this area very, very well.
Yes, this is a very provocative and fascinating topic that I think you should sit down and really kind of take it all in.
Yeah, it's one of those things that really requires an open mind because there's so many things in this area that can be very dogmatic or very set in concrete or things that people aren't that comfortable exploring. So it's one of those kinds of subjects where we'll probably touch on something that'll press somebody's buttons today.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, so with that, let's bring in Liz Parrish. How are you doing today, Liz? It's good to have you with us today.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here.
How are you doing in Washington? That's where you live, right out on an island. I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I identify with the forest. This is where I go to energize my mind and body and meditate. And you will find me in the forest if I'm anywhere at all. That I'm relaxing.
So we gave you an intro, but I want to take a few steps back to us meeting virtually because we've never really met in person. But there was a really significant event that occurred the day we actually talked for the first time. Now, I was just coming off of my 24-day fast, and we spoke some about that, but to talk about that entire first conversation that we finally had on the phone and what was going on in your life that day.
Right. So, yeah, I would like to preface this with Ray is a friend of mine, and actually Ray is a closer friend of mine than probably anyone listening can imagine because he goes into my deep psyche. And why is that? Why is that? Years ago, when I came up with the idea of a company that would genetically engineer people to help them live longer and healthier lives, increasing health span, not old age, but helping you live to a very old age healthy, Ray found me. You found me somehow online. And Ray sent me a paper about metabolism. And I got to say, it wasn't of my biggest interest at the moment. I was very deep in starting a company, but I read this paper and I was like, this is an incredibly intelligent person. And we know that the first steps in increasing health span, what you can do today is what you eat and how you exercise. And I always defer to Ray when it's what you eat because I am not an expert there. And one day I am traveling, and I'm traveling to do something really important. I'm actually traveling to take the first 2 gene therapies to treat biological aging. And we don't know what's going to happen. And, I've left my family on the island and they don't know what I'm about to do. And I'm trying to keep my mind really focused on this process that I'm going to go through and the positivity of it and the amazing things, the amazing outcomes that this might bring to the world. And I pull up Ray's paper and decide to take a look at it again because I'm sitting in an airport and I'm on a very long travel. And I decide to reach out to him. And I texted you. I can't remember if it was a regular phone text or if we texted through a social media, and we ended up having hours worth of conversation.
It was
And
great.
which I never told you that I was going to do a gene therapy. My mind was to not focus on that and to just focus on work and what we could do and who was out there trying to help make a better world. And I mean, we literally every time I got off of a plane, we texted. When you were off a plane, we texted.
Yeah, we were both
Yeah.
traveling across the country. That was really interesting.
Yeah, it was really amazing. And then I ended up texting a lot with you when you did, I think, a 21-day fast in California.
Right.
And every day I was checking in on you because I didn't even know a person could go that long without eating.
Yeah, it's kind of funny.
I did not know that. And so it was
actually,
like
he would be upset because it's actually 24 days and every day matters.
Okay.
Yeah.
and the sad part for me is I feel now sort of gypped because I didn't go 30. I should have gone 30 to make it an even month. But anyway, so well, tell us a little bit about what a gene therapy is, and tell us about BioViva and what you're trying to do in sort of the bigger brush, and then specifically what happens in gene therapy, and then we'll loop back to what it was that was going on in your life when we actually spoke for the first time.
Man, I am so sorry I took those 72 hours away from you. I imagine each one of those was, I remember you just telling me you were feeling so great and how amazing it was, once you got off that initial hump of the first few days, how amazing you were feeling. And I was looking at your blood sugar, and my son is type 1 diabetic. So that I understood that meant a lot to me. So what is gene therapy? That is a great question, because a lot of people think that gene therapy is this advanced technology of the future. So what is a gene? Let's go to that. So your body is made up of the products of genes. So your chromosomes, in every one of your cell, you have chromosomes, and there are genes in all of those chromosomes, and they code for proteins. And those proteins make you. So they're what you look like. Sometimes they're your behavior and how you think and how you express yourself and your tolerances for different things, like maybe different foods or different drugs. And they basically hold your disease risk inside them. So the first thing that you can do, the way to increase health span today, is to modify the way you live. And you can definitely put healthy years onto your life. But the way to modify what you die of, consequentially of your genes, is to modify the genes. So in gene therapy, we look at therapeutic genes, a way to put genes into your cells. It's a very natural process. Nature does this to you all the time. They're called viruses. And when you get sick from a virus, that virus has gone in and hijacked your system, often integrated a piece of genetic material that will probably make you resistant to the influenza or whatever the disease is, the viral disease in the future. But what we do with gene therapy is we actually harness those viruses. We take out their ability to get you sick, and we put in therapeutic genes. And these genes code for proteins that then change you. And this is how we will vastly, vastly change how long a person lives. And why do we know that? Because we have studies of multiple, what they're called model organisms, mammalian studies in various, mice and other species, and some insect studies too, that show that we can massively increase lifespan by modifying genes. So it's a natural process that happens to you every year with viral loads that people take up during the year, but we harness that to upregulate therapeutic genes. And let me just tell you kind of how that works. So you have a virus, you take out its ability to get a person sick, you put in a therapeutic gene, and then you deliver that to the body. And you're probably wondering, oh my gosh, Liz, does that work? Well, today there are 5 regulatory passed gene therapies for what's called monogenic disease, meaning the person was born with one gene that didn't work. And guess what? They are given one time, and it's a cure for the rest of the life of that patient. So these do work. They are in use, and we're just using them to look at the biggest unmet need on the planet, which is biological aging.
That's amazing. So, a lot of people think about genetic modification, and it's universally associated with, another three-letter acronym, GMO, and people think of it as just as, we can't do this because it's unnatural, that. But what I don't think people put together is that genetic modification is happening whether it's controlled or not. And so the real question is, do we want free-form, uncontrolled genetic modification, or do we want genetic modification where we actually know what we're doing? And this concept that somehow we're going to stop genes from being modified, or that nature always modifies genes in a positive way. This is a really great example, a black-white example, where a virus modifies in a way that can, cause sickness or actually cause death in the case of what we're seeing right now with coronavirus that is going right now while we're recording this. The bottom line here is that is a natural, perfectly natural genetic modification that's happening that's deleterious. And yet what you're talking about is doing something that is purposeful that actually is beneficial. And so this idea that all genetic modification is bad or evil or wrong or unnatural, this is really not the correct framework for this, is it?
Oh, no, it's not the correct framework. And actually, believe it or not, the natural viral loads that we uptake have radically changed humans for the better. It's believed that a lot of the genes that are associated with consciousness are actually viral loads. So what I mean is there are genes that are associated with long-term memory response. And so what that helps you do is actually predict for the future. And it seems to set us apart from other species, and it's been boiled down to a gene that came to us virally. The ability to carry fetuses to term, our great success with carrying pregnancies is due to the integration of viruses that then made us immune to viral attacks that used to abort a lot of fetuses. So there are actually good, positive viral loads as well that naturally occur. But in the case of gene therapy, this is actually harnessing the technology for a better future. So a lot of people say, wait a minute, what about evolution? And I want to touch on that really quick. Evolution is a random throw of the dice of the integration and benefits or deleterious effects of multiple gene outcomes. And evolution is, like you said, it is not necessarily a good thing. 99.9% of all species have gone extinct. And that's because evolutionarily they weren't set up with the proper genes. Now, we've been set up with some amazing genes. We've gotten this far through a multitude of other species. And now this gives us the ability to harness the technology and the knowledge to ensure that we live better, healthier, longer, stronger, smarter, faster, and better. And so this is the natural consequence to the next step of healthcare is to, so you can say, oh, well, I don't believe in genetic engineering. Well, you're actually getting it done to you anyway. Sometimes, like you said, in deleterious ways, like the coronavirus, that will kill a lot of people by the time it's done. But what we do is in science, we create immunizations. And guess what? That's a form of gene therapy. A lot of people don't know that. And that gives you a resistance to that virus before it gets to you. So the benefit of our ancestors is that they basically had to take on a lot of viral loads, and the plague killed a lot of people. But those who survived had that integration of that protection against that plague in the future, and then it helps us live longer. And now what we do is we harness technology and we give an immunization, which is similar to getting the illness without actually getting sick. It's quite amazing, and it extends human lifespan. So things like antibiotics and immunizations and just washing your hands, that is science at work, and it has increased human lifespan significantly. And so this is the natural next step of increasing lifespan. So if you think, oh boy, I don't know if I want to take a gene therapy to increase my lifespan. Well, do you want to get Alzheimer's? Do you want to get cancer?
Can I ask you a question? Like from a logistics perspective, we talk about epigenetics and we talk about, the diet and lifestyle kind of part of that. And so I'm just curious from a logistics perspective, like what does this mean? What does it mean to have a gene therapy? What did you go through? What was the process like?
Oh, sure. So when you get a gene therapy, you have to do a whole bunch of preliminary work. So you would go in and you would get a bunch of blood work done, some imaging done, various scanning. You would take a methylation kit, which is an epigenetics kit, and some genome kit testing. If you're going to do certain therapies, they would make it so you have to do other specific testing. And then what does the process look like? So we're looking at technology now through gene therapy that will make it so people won't have open heart surgery in the future. I mean, most surgeries will be based on traumatic injury because the idea of these genes is to not make you old longer, but keep you young longer, keep your body in a youthful state longer. So what does that process look like? Because we're talking about, radically paradigm shifting how we do medicine. Because right now we wait to get sick and we go in and we have some, really invasive surgeries. Well, gene therapy, if you're doing an anti-aging gene therapy, literally looks like an hour and a half IV drip. The viral vector is built up with the therapeutic gene in human-grade facilities. There is nothing that can get you sick in there. They go through a 16-week process of purification, ensuring that what you are delivered is a vector with a therapeutic gene. That is administered often via IV. Takes about 2 hours. My therapy took a lot longer because we did a lot of testing all over my body to ensure that it wouldn't cause things like cancer. We put it in high cancer risk areas. And then essentially you take an immunosuppressant for about a month after the therapy, and you get back to your life. And then you start to see the therapeutic benefits of the genes.
What have you seen in terms of your specific therapies?
How long has it been too? Like when did you do this?
So I did this over 4.5 years ago. So in September, it will be 5 years. And the things that we saw is increased length in my telomeres, which was important because I did a telomere lengthening therapy, and we can talk about that if you want to. Yes. We saw a 50% reduction in triglyceride levels. We saw a 25% reduction in blood glucose. We saw, I did 2 therapies. I did one to lengthen my telomeres, and I did another one to increase my muscle mass. And we saw in MRI images without exercise. I had been exercising regularly before. Without exercise, we saw an increase in muscle mass and a decrease in white fat. We saw no damage to any organs in my body. We saw, we even did a whole body MRI imaging to ensure that there was no tumor growth years after therapy. It has been really great.
You went in healthy. Like this is not like you weren't treating anything.
We were treating aging. So I was 44 when I got the therapy done. And by the time you're 44, you have a lot of accumulation of damage. And so that's essentially what we were treating. But yeah, I didn't wait to get sick before I got treated.
So that's an important point. Let's talk about aging as a disease, because for a lot of people, aging is another thing that gets tossed off as being, quote, natural, to include regulatory agencies, because it happens to everyone, and so therefore it's not a disease. Let's talk about aging in more of an avoidable disease state.
Yeah, aging is definitely a pathology. It's the most consistent pathology. So in the 1960s, the U.S. government finally decided that cancer was a disease. It was, remember, it was considered a natural process. And so it was something that they didn't want to put funds into. But because they decided to put funds into that, people now live decades after a diagnosis. So why would you want to consider something like aging a disease? Again, it's the most succinct pathology on the planet. So you can have 100 people in the room with the same cancer, but genetically the cancer is all different. But aging has a natural progression and a natural course. Even though, yes, it's true, some people biologically age different than other people. You can have 65-year-olds in the room, 10 of them, and they can biologically age at a different rate based on their lifestyle and their genetic susceptibilities. But they will all go through similar courses and die of, really, generally, if you live and die of aging, you die generally only of about 4 or 5 different diseases, and you have all of those diseases in parallel except cancer. Cancer is the one thing that is stochastic. It will eventually affect everyone on the planet, but it is a very specific disease outside of the other diseases of aging. So let's put this into perspective. If you had a woman who was going to live to 80 years and die, if you cured cancer today, the maximum you add to her lifespan is 4 years. So, and if you cured heart disease and cancer, then you and diabetes, let's say you cure 3 diseases, you significantly increase her lifespan but only by about 16 years, because all of the diseases, it is aging that is killing you. Symptoms of aging are heart disease, cancer, kidney failure, dementia. Those are just symptoms of aging. And so when you target aging itself, and yes, we can do this, you actually eradicate the biggest killers on the planet. You completely change the paradigm of what people die from. So biological aging is a disease. Chronological aging, of course, is what most people think of. They take it really seriously. You say aging is a disease, and they're like, what? You're insulting me. Well, no, we want you to get chronologically very old, but it's that biological aging process, and the underlying hallmarks of aging is what we're targeting with these gene therapies. So the hallmarks of aging are things like telomere attrition, mitochondrial dysfunction, cellular nutrient issues. There are pillars of the hallmarks of aging, and they're what are driving things like inflammation and all of the distress and the buildup of atherosclerotic plaques and the body's inability to clear damage that leads to what you die from. So biological aging is just cellular damage over time. And that's what we're trying to target.
Right. And when we look at this, even if a person has a perfect diet, just like the first line of our book, you're not going to live forever eating carrots. And we say this, what we can do with diet is significantly stave off some of those things like glucoregulatory issues or cardiovascular disease or maybe even cancers. But it doesn't make you diabetes proof. It doesn't make you heart disease proof. There are still things that can happen later in life. And what you're talking about is really thinking about us also at a cellular level, because even if you think of us as this one big organism, we're still that collection of trillions of cells, and those cells have all of that aging in themselves, like the half-life limit, for which is says a human cell can reproduce about 52 times and then it's over. So this idea that if you could completely renew yourself, like many things in your body do, but do that because all of us started as a single cell. I mean, our single cell that we began as, that single egg, at that moment, the blueprint to every other cell in your body is there. And we grow from that, and the question then becomes, why can't we harness that to regenerate tissues as those tissues degrade down into a disease state? Isn't this really what we're talking about?
Yeah. So again, biological aging is cellular degeneration over time. So what we look at is genes that upregulate regeneration. So all we need to do is upregulate more regeneration than the degeneration. And guess what? With a bunch of different gene candidates, you can do that in cells. But how you affect the whole model organism is more difficult. So like you said, so you have a cell division limit of about 52 divisions, and that's called the Hayflick limit. And that's been proven in multiple species now, not just humans. But when you lengthen telomeres, for instance, it's not a cure for aging, but it's probably the most powerful gene therapy to target the most hallmarks of aging. When you use that gene therapy, you can actually it's called immortalizing cells in a dish. So there's two ways to do that. One is cancer. We don't want that. The other one is telomerase. And what happens is the cells go through healthy lifespan and cell death, but almost an infinite amount of times. So if you lengthen the telomeres, the cells can divide and divide and divide in healthy capacity, almost unlimited. And so that is the type of technology we're looking at. So that helps with several of the hallmarks of aging and helps the body actually live significantly longer. In mouse studies, mice live about 30% longer, even though telomere attrition isn't what they die from. So you can see that with humans, it's vastly different because telomere attrition vastly drives what we die from. When telomeres get short, cells get senescent. That means they get old. That's another hallmark of aging. They don't divide. They send off cytokine inflammatory markers to the cells around them, damaging them. And it's directly associated with all of the diseases of aging, short telomeres. So, and we can look at children. So we can get into that. Why I didn't actually mean to be working on cures for aging. I got into this to find cures for childhood disease. And there are diseases in childhood that are directly associated with short telomeres. One of those being progeria, which is an accelerated aging disease in children. And they generally look very, very old when they're in their teen years. And so telomeres are the caps at the ends of your chromosomes. They shorten as your cells divide. It's believed that the mechanism for reading the gene goes and it cuts off both ends just in order to not replicate something that shouldn't be there. So your chromosomes, the ends of them get shorter and shorter with every cell division. And as those chromosomes get shorter, it leads to something called genomic instability, meaning the chromosome isn't packed tightly with those end caps. Think of them as a packing mechanism. And genomic instability is the hallmark of cancer. And cancer, that's why I'm telling you, it's very stochastic. It just seems to happen for a myriad of random reasons. One of them is short telomeres, others environmental, and the things that you ingest and breathe.
So you were the first person to bravely go and adventure into this journey, right? You pioneered this. Mm-hmm. So, and in 4.5, almost 5 years, what has evolved or what has changed, and how is this going in terms of human testing and all of that?
Well, that's where things get crazy. Prick up your ears because you're about to have your mind blown. So we now have exclusive partnerships with medical tourism companies that give people access to these technologies today. And we believe that this is the most humane way to move forward, that you should have agency and autonomy to your body. So you should have the right to live or the right to die. And we need human data. We need the data on how these therapeutics work so that we can get them through the regulatory system in an expedited rate. Now, right now, through the US FDA, if I have a drug and I think that it might work in some part of your body, if I'm not correct, I fail. It costs about $1 billion to get a drug passed. And phase 3 alone, if you make it to phase 3, there's 3 phases in human testing. Phase 3 has a 94% failure rate. So our idea is to allow people to get access to these therapeutics. My company is just a bioinformatics company. We look at the data. The partnership companies are patient access companies. We want to look at that data and find the endpoints of these drugs. And we don't just want to do it for our company. We platform this technology for other companies too. So let's just say you're an investor and you have had 3 CEOs sit in front of you and they swear they have the cure for everything that ails you, because something works amazingly in a mouse. It worked great in a rat. It looked good in a dog. That doesn't mean it's going to work in a human. And that's why the failure rate through the regulatory systems is so high. So we're asking investors to bring those great candidates to us. And if there's enough reproducible data and our doctors feel that these drugs are safe enough to be used at least in patients with the highest need, terminal patients, patients who don't have access to things that'll work, then we might choose to use those and get those investors and those companies their first data of how well their drugs perform. Because it is vastly inhumane to not allow people access to this technology. Over 100,000 people die every day of biological aging alone. Without, you taking out all of the accidents and childhood deaths even. And that's 37 million people a year that could have helped pioneer technology and might have even saved their own lives. There is actually, to me, there's no ethics debate here at all. All phase testing is a trial on humans. It's all experimental. And many of these drugs, even when they get out of the FDA's gold standard, still end up getting pulled from the shelf. This technology is the most direct technology. Gene and cell technology is direct technology, meaning that you're making the protein you need at your cell, meaning there are no off-target effects in the sense of the traditional route of small molecules. You take a drug,
Right.
You ingest it, it hurts your liver, hurts your kidneys, and maybe it lowers your LDL cholesterol, but it increases your risk significantly of type 2 diabetes and dementia. Those are not good drugs. These are going right to the cellular level and upregulating the protein that your body will benefit from with no off-target effect. So, we really think that people need access to this technology. And yes, we think that it is the most humane thing to do is to get people access to that and to expedite therapeutic cures to the world. And then knowing those endpoints, we can turn that phase 3 failure rate of 94% into a success rate. You can see the power of that.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that we do have the ability to do what we want, and obviously we understand, we as a society, for whatever reason, told the government, protect us. And then we created this entire litigious backbone that everybody really is dealing around. In fact, we've talked on a number of different podcasts, and we've talked in terms of diet. Most physicians believe diet has nothing to do with health. They just really don't. And I say that, what I mean is that when someone comes in with cardiovascular disease, diabetes, even cancer, they're not going to tell them or talk to them about diet first. They're just really not going to discuss it. They may, in the passing, say something, but not in the way that Juliana and I work with people. But what's really interesting here is that we've created a system, a sort of a self-licking ice cream cone, where it says, hey, protect us from these drugs, or protect us from, let's just say, quackery, protect us from a scam artist, protect us from, these unforeseen side effects. And so we created this ultimate process by which we hunt for side effects. And then even to go a step further, in our last episode of Science and Sorcery, or just a few episodes ago, we had a physician there who specializes, a urologist who specializes in sexual dysfunction. And, Viagra was a side effect of a blood pressure medicine that went back through and became this drug to supposedly target erectile dysfunction, when in fact it was just they're just marketing a side effect. What you're talking about doing is, one, very specifically going in and treating the cause, the underlying cellular genetic cause of the issue. And then two, you're saying that rather than go through this entire expensive process of approval that ends mostly in failure with billions of dollars lost in the process, that people could have the right to be be an N of one, still do it in a very controlled fashion, still do it with a lot of attention to detail, but do this in a way where that litigious layer is sort of cleared away. Isn't that what we're talking about? Trying to get the regulatory and litigious layers to push aside so that we can actually see how some of these things work?
Yeah, absolutely. We want safe drugs, but we need the people who need access to technology to get access. And we just so happen to desperately need human data. So right now, with some of these gene therapies, we may have been sitting on the cure to a myriad of things that ail us, but we don't have ways to get those to humans. And then let's just talk about the drugs that have been through the US FDA. I am not here to pick any fights. I think that if your doctor has prescribed you a drug, you should stay on it until you don't need it. But let's just look at some statistics. The US is only 5% of the world's population, only 5%. We take in the US 75% of all the prescription drugs. We take almost all of the prescription drugs on the planet.
I had not heard that. That is mind-blowing.
Yeah, you can look that up at the CDC. We actually have the shortest lifespan of every industrialized country.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That means it's not helping. We're taking most of the prescription drugs, and we have the shortest lifespan of all the industrialized countries. And countries that use very little medicine have longer lifespans, and we sit above just some of the countries that are very, very close and closing in on us, where people have very low access to that technology. Now, does that mean that you should forego your drugs? No. And does that mean that you should forego the investment in new therapeutics like gene therapy? Of course not, because now we're looking at, extending your healthy lifespan. People don't want to live old longer. People today, we have extended human healthy lifespan with the interventions that we have today and our great lifestyles that are much better, and the abundance of nutrition, and sometimes the overabundance of nutrition. But we spend today 30% of our life in chronic illness. And that's serious because, you and I are feeling great, but not everybody who's listening to this is feeling great. That's 30% of your life in chronic disease, and hundreds of millions of people are suffering from chronic disease every day. So that you and I feel great just means that we have to mobilize more to help those people who don't feel great. And so the ability to, if you went in and you had an intravenous fluid for an hour and a half, and it made it so when you're 90, you can still climb a rock wall, or when you're 100, you're still playing active tennis. And I don't mean 100-year-old tennis of healthy people today, but I mean you're still out there doing the things that you like. I believe that adds meaning to your life.
Yes.
And that if you are a person who just so happened to win the genetic lottery and is doing that, you're still going to die of the diseases of aging. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be looking out for your neighbor who can't. We have to look out for each other. We need to create a better world. And economically, we actually can't afford the cost of the burden of aging. Did you know? This is 2020, guys, just in case there's no timestamp on this. This year is the first year on the planet that there's more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 5.
That's crazy.
I heard that was estimated, but is it actually true?
It is true. And the beauty of this is that people are living longer, better. The bad thing about this is the under 5, remember, that's on the whole planet. So those are vastly still coming from countries that are still in their developing phases. And those are the healthcare payers. So places like Japan and Germany and places like this already had more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 5. But these payers, these are the healthcare payers, and they go on to be, 15, 20, 25, and 30. The 65-year-olds just go on to be sicker and sicker. And so we don't have enough payers for the system. And, the US GDPR, we can't afford it. We cannot afford paying for all of these aging diseases. Each one of the diseases of aging is $1 trillion disease. Some of those globally and some of those independently. Heart disease, $1 trillion disease, right in the United States.
Yeah, it's crazy. And by the way, I pull it up while you were there just to have the number. So this is the World Health Organization data, and this is 2016 published data. United States was number 38 on the list, so
For lifespan.
Yeah. And so, I mean, 3 cheers for Estonia and Poland and Bosnia that are beyond us, but every other company, Panama, Croatia, Albania, Belgium, United Kingdom. I mean, it's just the whole litany. Japan is obviously number one. And there's this whole litany of countries above us. And it's crazy when you contrast it the way you just did with taking that percentage of the drugs. And so this entire infrastructure that's there, like I said earlier, this self-licking ice cream cone, it's not that we want to stop any of these things or not that these other things shouldn't be investigated, but the entire system has gotten way, way, way out of balance from the perspective that an individual isn't allowed to do this, that knows they're going to die of something. I mean, it's not like anybody expects. We know, we all know that we have this disease called aging. Some people don't like to accept it as that, but we know that our bodies are in some sort of decline. Even if you slow the decline with diet and exercise, even if you slow the decline with better lifestyle choices, the fact of the matter is, it's just slowing it. It's only giving you a 10 or 15 year at best, in our case, health span, where you're living more happily and healthily.
I would suggest, honestly, that it's a novel idea for most people. You're saying that we know, but I think a lot of people will go, aging is a disease, Right.
I mean,
I think that's a real novel concept that people haven't embraced yet. I think I only heard about it recently, last 4 or 5 years. And you have to wrap your brain around it because it's not what we've accepted.
Yeah. I mean, the very first thing people say, I think, is, oh, well, we're going to have a population problem.
Right.
And then, my initial response to that right away is, okay, well, what that we're going to die of now, which disease shouldn't we cure? Because if I can give you a list of all the diseases you're going to die of, and you agree that each one of those diseases individually that we should be able to treat, we're going to let's just stop curing cancer right now. Let's just stop treating heart disease. If everybody has to die of something, then which ones do we stop curing? And what you're talking about, Liz, which makes so much sense, is that we are spending trillions of dollars having people die in the most expensive, miserable way
Painful
possible.
way,
That's
right.
really what we're doing. And we're saying, can we come up with a humane way to avoid those disease states altogether?
Yeah, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, I call it, around this. So, we live by myths. And so there's only so many facts. There's, mathematical facts, and there's biological facts, and now we know we can modify those. But there's all of these myths that we live by, and they really limit our ability to take in information. So, for instance, if somebody said that, your death gives meaning to life, humans find meaning because they're going to die. Well, I can absolutely guarantee that everyone listening to this, even with major breakthroughs, is eventually going to die, or sun's going to absorb the earth, and maybe you'll even make it farther than that, because we have a bioethicist on the company, and he works at the Futures of Humanity Institute in Oxford, and they deal with all sorts of problems. But we're not really challenging you. We're basically saying the things that you already wanted to cure, we're going to cure. And if we look at population, so remember, all technology is running in parallel with us. We're feeding more people than ever. Science and technology is lifting up the globe more every day than it ever has done. We generally do good with technology. So when we're talking about people living longer, healthier, we're actually talking about needing less resources for each person. And we can see, and this is actually proven, this is another graph that you can look up. Google has a great graph on it. As lifespan increases, birth rates go down. And that's why now we're at the more people over 65 than under the age of 5, because everywhere in the world, regardless of religion, belief systems, diet, or anything else, when lifespan increases, they have less children. It's an incredible phenomena. And so we don't project, massive expansion in the future. But if we have it, we will support it, because, when you need something, that is when change comes in, and we've already learned to do a myriad of things that we need to do. Now we need to learn to take care of the planet. A lot of times, we go out and we end up ravaging, the environment to do things, but we have to actually learn to work with the environment, because your soil and your air are paramount to your biology's success. And if you don't believe me, look back at all of the mass extinctions. But anyway, we are working towards a better world. There are less people coming into the world already naturally due to increase in lifespan. And by increasing it more, it doesn't mean that all other systems fall apart. In fact, they don't. We actually live long enough to solve problems. So when you look at industrialization, it is on the back of lifespan. And every country that starts to take a step up, and you can think of it as global economies now. When a country goes in, or a company goes in, a smaller entity within that country goes in to hire workers somewhere else in the world, it is not based on just cheap work. It's based on lifespan. Go and look it up. As soon as people are living long enough in a country to be trained and do a job, so the company gets back the assets of the training time from those people, that's when countries start to lift up on population lifespan. So what we can achieve with lifespan is already been proven, and we will solve bigger problems with increased lifespan. We have a lot more pressure if we're going to be around here for a while longer in human, healthy, biological bodies.
And a lot more wisdom and experience to use.
Yeah. I mean, it's so sad that when we have, normally the most resources, the most wisdom, the most to offer the people around us, that you just, suddenly in a moment, life gets sucked away. And this idea of, just what could we accomplish if you had, the idea of an extra generation. In other words, when we look at sanitation and infectious disease control, which is really the thing that's most responsible for living longer in the last century, think of what we've done with all of those extra years that those people were alive. It's, it's not just, well, first of all, it was, children, most children dying before the age of 10, which caused the opposite problem of what you were discussing, which is bigger and bigger families, because you don't know if your children are going to survive and you need them to take care of you. I mean, that's where we were just a century or two ago. And now we have this extra generation of life so that we can be grandparents and great-grandparents. And so the question then becomes, when you add another generation of time on there, what can you accomplish? And I mean, I don't think people see or often stop to think about the human potential that is snuffed out. They look at the problems and just see the problems in isolation. But so far, as humans, we have risen to the occasion, and we have sort of out-engineered and out-thought most of the issues that are before us.
Yeah, it literally, losing life is like book burning. I really love people, and I'm amazed by them, and I'm amazed by the human species. I mean, we are building towards something, and that's why we know all these things about genetics now. That's why we know about space travel. That's why we know about all these things. We are unconsciously building towards something, and I think that we are going to be at some point great. I think that people are 80% good, and they've got this 20% not so great intentions, and as long as you don't feed that 20% and you feed the 80% good, we accomplish great things. All the science and technology we have built is benefiting people globally. So we have an amazing future ahead of us, and working together towards that future is just absolutely paramount. And the deaths that we succumb to today is literally book burning. So I can sit down with somebody who you wouldn't, but some other people might think, why would you talk to that person? And they have an amazing story. Mm-hmm. They have an immense amount of information that is really valuable to the world. And we have to embrace that value and see what we can be in the future. So the future, the human that we would like to build is a human that does not damage more than they repair. It's empathetic. It's able to work with groups and work on big ideas and do amazing things. And you can see that the species is more than halfway there. We are amazing. It's just unfortunately we are disease ridden. And let's just take things. I'm going to take things out of scope entirely for a minute, and I'm going to say, look at the things that we choose for. So we choose for health and the good of people who are in less advantageous genetic situations than we are. My son has type 1 diabetes, and it grieves me every day. It is a great reminder to work, and I work every day because I love my work and it's meaningful to me. And he is alive because of medicine. Every day he has to take insulin with every meal, and he is alive, and we choose for that. We have chosen for that. But if we can choose to fix that for him and children who come into the world and for ourselves so that we don't have to suffer. Now, there will always be suffering in the world. So if you're one of those people that thinks suffering gives meaning to the world, there will be plenty of heartbreaks and wrecked cars and fender benders. We don't need these diseases to bring meaning to the world. We have enough drama outside of them. And so since we have chosen to keep people alive long enough who have conditions, who may have not otherwise had families and other things, I think the right thing to do is to fix the problem. Now, let's look at the other side of that. And actually, my son is very athletically inclined. So he's got some sports genes. There's a great book called The Sports Gene. There's a new one out about musicians. These people actually have genes that are better than yours and mine. They have genes that make them perform better. Well, how about equality? I want to run faster. The Bolt gene does it. It's the easiest to edit gene. I can increase your muscle mass. We can already do that with gene therapy. Why should only some people get to excel at mountain climbing and sports? So there are people who are born with detriments, and there are people who are born with benefits. And genetics and genetic modification gives us the ability to level the playing field, plus do better than that.
Yeah,
keep you from dying of dementia.
One thing I think a lot of people struggle with, back to the cognitive dissonance they're thinking about, is this idea that there's this zero-sum game, that somehow if we have more, some other place has less, and that there's only so much to pass around. And, it reminds me of a conversation. If you look on YouTube, I'm sure you can find this, but Bob Metcalf, he was the creator of TCP/IP. He co-invented Ethernet, so how we communicate. And, one of the things, he does a really amazing lecture called The Internet, which it's about energy, it's about conservation, it's about how we actually solve the problem of bandwidth. And for a lot of you guys listening, you weren't here when modems were like 2400 baud, when we couldn't really transfer stuff. And back in the 80s and 90s, back in the 80s and 90s, the name of the game always was, how can we compress the data, because there's a limited amount of bandwidth and we can only push a certain amount over the internet. And so we got to compress all of our files and then transfer them. And what he points out in this lecture that he did at Singularity University, this would be probably in 2009 if you look it up, but what he points out, which is so amazing, is that we never once solved our data transmission problems by compressing our way out of the problem. In other words, the way all of this happened, and the fact that right now we have, it's crazy to think that, that we have 1,000 megabits. I mean, or, we've got amazing Google Fiber right into your living room now. I mean, data bandwidth is practically, and the idea of having, for example, long distance phone calls. I was talking with Juliana about that the other day, about, what long distance phone call bills used to be. And we were talking about that. The whole concept that it costs money to talk long distance is crazy. Like you can just, like we're having this audio conversation right now over not really phone. We're really having it. I mean, you might use a device that you call a phone on the end, but at the end of the day, we're just using, in this case, FaceTime audio, and we're just doing a digital transmission of that data. But here's the point. The point is, is there aren't limited resources. There are unbelievable amounts of resources. And then when we even stop to think about the limited resources of the earth, then we go back to my first love and my, Ray 1.0 of space and opening up space access, which we see is happening with Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and others from what we did with the X Prize originally. What we see is there's unbelievable resources if we just, for example, harness the materials in a single asteroid. And while all of that sounds science fiction, think about what it's going to take to explore our solar system. We need to be able to live more than a current lifetime, certainly more than the 35 or 40 years someone maybe lived a century ago. And now even at 100, if you wanted to go, for example, to the nearest star, how are you going to get there if you can only live 100 years, right? So it's back to resources. This step one for us to have more resources is not to play off one person's life versus their weight on society, but rather one person's life based on what absolutely they can open up in society and what they could do. And if you're not that person who wants to live a long time, the law should be equally a favor. And you say, hey, I'm done at 100. I'm done at 80. I'm done at 150. I'm done at 300. Whenever you're done, you can be done if that's what your choice is, right? This goes both ways.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, I believe in that.
Yeah, so this idea that
the right to die.
Right, you have this domain, but what we do now is we spend 75% of healthcare costs on the last 3 years of people being alive, and it's marginal living at best. I mean, Juliana's recently had several friends that have died recently, and it takes a huge emotional toll on her, and clearly their family as well. And this idea that we could actually have technology available right now today that could significantly push that period off to a point when they wanted to make that decision. Is that too philosophical, or do you see the connections there between?
No, I absolutely see the connections between the right to live and the right to die. I think that they go hand in hand. And I was just talking to a magazine editor yesterday about that. It is really imperative that you have agency and autonomy, and that the government isn't ruling over that. You should have the right to decide, and humanely. Many people, unfortunately, maybe with conditions that are treatable, like depression, they will be treatable with genetics in the future, but the technology is catching up to that. They inhumanely take their life, put their families in a massive state of grief, finding them in terrible situations. And this should be done humanely, although in those cases, of course, I would hope for treatment. But if somebody is done, they're done, and they shouldn't have to do something horrendous and horrible and terrible. In disease states, they should have the right to do the same thing. And it is an imperative that we have those rights and flexibilities, that the government doesn't reside over those potentials.
Yeah.
How does this even, I'm getting so emotional listening to this because it's really powerful and it's really important. And, I'm really inspired by how you talk about it, Liz. How do we even begin to evolve that conversation? This sounds like it has to come from, above the level of, making policy changes and all that. But, perhaps it's just a conversation from the ground roots and from what you're doing and all of that, and just kind of awareness of the potential. But it sounds like so enormous.
Yeah, well, what we need is, I spent several years flying around and talking to governments and ministers of health, and I met a couple presidents. And, the thing what we need to do is we need to stop talking about it, and we need human evidence. And so we are pushing for human evidence.
Volunteers.
And then there's, we have tons of those. But the thing is, what we need is the human evidence that the technology works. And unfortunately, going back to something that Ray was talking about, space travel and gene therapy are very, very expensive, but they could be affordable. And, people's techno fears that they're not going to get access to the technology if it works and only the rich are going to keep it. That's just not the way that things work anymore. So let's look at the first supercomputer. I couldn't have afforded the first supercomputer. And now everywhere in the world, people have a device that is a multitude of times more powerful than that, called a smartphone. And even in countries that are in earlier developing stages, people have access to this technology. And it's because we're prolific about getting technology out there. We're better than ever. And so when this technology works, it's going to get out to people and it's going to be more affordable. Today, gene therapy is cost prohibitive and very few people can afford it. We have our partner company has one trial right now that is 100% paid for patients with dementia. And so they're looking for candidates to go through that. And it is a free gene therapy, essentially, that they do have to pay for travel and pre and post testing through their medical doctors. But that's unprecedented outside of a clinical trial, which is very hard for people to get into. I've known people who have contacted our company and they're 80 years old and they have Parkinson's. And there was a clinical trial, but they didn't qualify for the clinical trial because they're too old. Can you imagine being told that you're too old to participate in experimental medicine?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes me so basically it's a death sentence. And so, we want to get people access, and we're hoping that more nonprofits and more philanthropists will come forward to donate money so that people can get access to therapeutics. We're using Maximum Life Foundation is raising money for people. I think they started last year with a woman named Desi, who was a wonderful woman. She was over 100 years old, but she died waiting for a treatment because, we were waiting for donations. And she was amazing. And now we've got a new candidate, Greta Blackburn, she is so fantastic. You really have to meet her. She was an actress. She was on, I think, the series V and a myriad of other things. And she's a musician, and she is just all about life and living. And she actually was behind the beginning of TA65, which was a nutraceutical for lengthening telomeres. But she's really excited about this, and she's come up as a candidate. But we're trying to raise money to actually get people access to these technologies. But outside of that, that company that we work with charges people who want to get access to technologies that companies can't afford you to get access to, and that's why you have to raise $1 billion to get through the FDA. But it'll be easy to raise that money when we have the data on how well these therapies work. And so we are looking forward to taking them through the regulatory services and getting them passed as drugs that, yes, will get to a lot of people. And if they work really, really well, they'll get to the whole world, because rich people don't want to pay for poor people's health care. And people in countries that get access to medicine do not like to see people suffer in other countries without access to that technology. We can make this affordable for everyone, and the whole globe can benefit from it.
Yeah, it's true. And this is this zero-sum game kind of, mentality. Our real good friend of ours, Alex Epstein, talks about maximizing human flourishing. And he talks about the other side of fossil fuels, the fact that they have allowed unbelievable control of the environment, even though people often want to say, hey, we need to go back to a natural state, et cetera. And a person is free to go back and use as little technology as they want. But the idea that we're going to squelch lots of other people and by law or by, force, tell people they can't use technology to benefit themselves in the way they see fit, this is really, a debate of our time, because again, technology has demonstrated over and over and over that human life and human flourishing has gotten better. Infant mortality is down. Mortality for children under 5 is down. Life expectancy of birth is up. Malnutrition is down. And when we look across, in fact, from natural disasters. The number of people in the last century that die from natural disasters, is down. And it's down because of those communication devices you're talking about. It's down because we can predict where weather is going in the future in the short term, and we can avoid people being completely, taken out. Or, when the drought comes through, we can get water in there. So the point here is that we have shown over the last century that we can master our environment better and better, and that has resulted in what we have. And any person who believes things are fixed right now, these species that are alive right now, this organization right now, this part of the earth being free from humans or human populated, the idea that it's all right now, or was it right 50 years ago? Was it right 100 years ago? Was it right 1,000 years ago? At what point do you want to extract humans from the natural evolution of things and say whatever their decisions are or whatever their agency is, they have absolutely no impact on the world around them? That the world exists somehow in some absence of the most successful species that's ever walked or ever been on the planet, in terms of being, being able to control their environment and control their destiny. And this becomes really somewhat the last step.
Oh yeah, this is the crazy thing is when we talk about what will actually save the planet, it is not going backwards. When people go backwards and they start living off the land, it actually is very destructive. You're going to have somebody listening and they're going to go, oh, no, I could go, hunt a deer and light a fireplace. Lighting a fireplace is massively bad for the planet. And as a matter of fact, the more people who do it, the worse it is. And we don't have those kind of natural resources anymore. So now what we're talking about is natural resources. So going back to the way people used to live will not solve our problem. It would destroy the forests, and the amount of carcinogens that come out of a fireplace are extraordinary. Okay, if you want to do your neighbor a favor, don't light it. We are becoming more and more efficient with energy all of the time, and going off of the grid can sometimes be really super detrimental to it. And as a matter of fact, one good place to look at is China. You can. I've been to China a few times, and you can go and drive through the countryside, and everybody is farming, and it's actually really cool because in their backyard they have all of this farming going on. But it turns out that it's actually massively inefficient, and it takes away from a workforce that could be working on greater ideas. So moving forward with technology is definitely the way to do that. And I know that Ray, you and I have talked a lot about GMOs. There is almost no food that you eat today that is in its natural state. It's been genetically modified by either breeding, splicing, or you can just directly genetically modify a crop. And there are some negative outcomes, and they get the biggest views, like the ones where you worry about seeds being able to germinate and things like that. But there are some really positive benefits of it too, and sometimes countries like ours don't understand the impact to countries who don't get to benefit from this. For instance, the whole golden rice, putting vitamin A in rice in Asia would save tens of thousands of children from going blind and dying early. But because we have overnutrition in the United States, a lot of people are like, no, don't modify that. Everything is modified, and almost nothing that we eat is in a natural form of it where it was a couple hundred years ago. And if it was, it would be so inefficient that we wouldn't be eating. Tomatoes don't look like tomatoes. Potatoes don't look like potatoes. It's kind of probably potatoes being one of the more natural looking substances, but everything is bigger, better, and more robust than it ever was before because of some sort of selective breeding. And so you can do that the really slow way, or you can advance that. I'm a big proponent of synthetic foods of the future that we don't have yet today that are less abrasive to the environment. I'm a vegetarian. Again, I'm an ethical vegetarian. So I go to Ray to actually understand how I should eat, because mostly what I'm trying to do is not have a big impact on the planet. And so you can make certain choices that will help with that. But as far as like going back and lighting a fire and going caveman, the planet could not absorb this many people doing that.
Yeah.
Going forward is the way to go.
So as we bring this to a close, where do you think things will be in 5, 10, and 20 years? I mean, what do you feel like the future, based on your vantage point and the therapies that you've already taken with yourself, what do you think is going to happen in the next 5, 10, and 15 years?
Well, I think that based on the patient data that we're seeing, we're going to have massive advances in gene therapy to treat aging. So people will be looking forward to living longer and better. In 5 years, that's not going to translate to the general population, because it takes about 8 to 15 years to get through a regulatory system. So if you're waiting for a regulatory drug, the drugs that are coming through those systems today are already old, right? That's part of the problem of translation of health, is by the time the population gets a drug, there's already a better version in research. But we'll be looking at living healthier, happier lives. I'm hoping that, look at the damage that we've done to the planet. It's beautiful, because the reason we know the damage, it's not great that animals are going extinct. I mean, that's a terrible thing. But the reason that we know it is because we want to do something about it, because we're actually collecting data. We are like a little ant nest, and we're going crazy all over the planet. And this is how we're going to solve it, is through this knowledge and this data. And we have collected immense amount of data, and that gives us actionable things that we can do to actually target that. And we're going to see more of that. We're going to see, I'm a techno-optimist. We're going to see extending human health spans first, and then we'll see lifespan as a consequence to that. We're going to see people treating the biosphere better. This is a very special place. It's the most beautiful thing, because we can look far and wide, and there's not much out there that we can see that's like it. And we have to learn from it instead of, trying to re-engineer something that we don't understand. And that is going to help us immensely expand into outer space and be successful colonizing asteroids while they're mined and things like that. And if you think that sounds crazy, 5 years ago when I started this company, I met a guy who had a company in Australia, still around. He was already selling lightweight parts to create habitable living structures on asteroids to mine them. And he by that point had raised more money than I've ever raised for curing aging.
Yeah.
I mean, it's people, these companies have real money, and much of the world does not even know that that's happening. So, I mean, it's just really exponential, and you just need to really open your mind and get excited about the future. I'm not here. It's going to challenge people to listen to this conversation. I was challenged. In 2013, I went looking for cures for kids, because I had volunteered 2 years of my life for the advocacy of stem cells. Then my son got sick, and I saw that none of that technology had actually translated to kids. The kids in the hospital were dying. Then I went looking for cures, genetic cures, because I thought that, and I knew that the reason that stem cells worked was because of genetics. It wasn't a miracle cell. It was a cell that was driven by its epigenetics. So I went looking for cures for kids, and I ran into aging research, and I was like, what the hell is wrong with these people? Like, I am trying to help kids live a full life, and these people want to live longer. And then I had that epiphany moment of an 85-year-old is just 8.5 decades old. We're children. Of course, nobody wants to die. I mean, we're an intelligent species. We have the ability to harness this technology. Why wouldn't we harness this technology? And those 100,000 people that die every day of aging could spearhead cures for kids in a fraction of a time, because every gene we look at will also treat a childhood disease. It's a very intricate process, but it is driven vastly by the hallmarks of aging. Much of it is. So I mean, I just want people to get really excited. I don't want you to think, oh, there's a big dispute here. There's actually a big thing to open your mind to. I was also taken aback by it, but the future looks amazing, and the technology looks amazing. And the problem is you read 0.0000001% of what's actually happening in the world in magazines every day that almost is all bad, but that's not what's happening. The rest percentage of that, the nearly 100% of what's happening, is really good things and good people doing great work.
A lot of that innovation is often unspoken, and it's just an amazing message you have today in terms of what we can look forward to in the future, and we're very, very, very grateful to have you on. We need to have you back at some point and get an update on how you're doing personally and how your gene therapy is progressing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think the last thing I just want to leave people with on your trajectory of in 15 years, for sure, you'll be at probably less than that, probably in the next 5 years. Hopefully you get interest. You're going to be picking the genes that you want integrated for your own personal superpowers. Do you want to regenerate faster? Do you want to be faster? We already know how to make you stronger. We're working on genes for intelligence now, Clotho, that actually helps protect against chronic kidney disease and heart disease, but it increases intelligence. We can already do that today. So it's like, you are going to become the designer of yourself. And no matter what you believe in spiritually, it does not affect that, because if you believe in something spiritually, you would believe that this is why this is given to people to harness, to get us closer to where we need to go. So get excited about it, because you're going to, I think I picture an app, and the app is going to say the genes. I wish somebody would build this for us, our company. It's going to say the genes, and it's going to say the benefits, and you're going to be choosing those, and then you're going to be preparing your future for when you're going to actually take those therapies. And these gene therapies are given to people who are older and in need today, but they'll be given as preventative medicine in the future. They'll be given younger and younger, so that you stop the damage before it's gone too far.
I love this.
Your enthusiasm is really infectious.
And I love challenging status quo. I mean, obviously, Juliana and I do that every day with diet, and people say, you can't. And it's like, yes, you can actually, and you can do a lot right now, but this is sort of that next level, and it's great to have you on this week. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, listen to Ray and Juliana for what you should be eating. I cannot help you there. It's really a lifestyle thing. Again, like, I'm the worst vegetarian because I did it for ethical reasons, which is great, but it's lifestyle. It's making a healthy body. And that's what we're trying to do with genetics. And that's what Ray's trying to do and Juliana's trying to do with your life, is create a healthy body that stays in homeostasis as long as possible. And that is a real lifestyle shift. That's something that is bigger than just some fad diet.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Great.
Too. Fascinating, right?
Yes. Unbelievable.
That'll
I
make
love
you
that.
think.
We've got to have her back.
It's definitely a lot to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on this leafy green path to good health.
It's always the food. So remember,
Keep
keep
eating
eating
right.
right.
Thank you for listening to Science and Saucery. For more details about the content in today's show, or to contact Juliana and Ray, please visit us at healthspansolution.com.
Welcome to the first day